Well, Australian states and territories have shifted responsibility for the pandemic chaos to the Morrison government, saying they will continue to impose lockdowns and border closures until a significant majority of the population is vaccinated. For more on the developing story, Ben Oquist, Executive Director of the Australia Institute, joins us. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Adrian. Thanks for having me on.
So, as we just touched on, it's being viewed by many as a disaster. There's confusing signs out there when it comes to the vaccination rollout. What is your take on what is going on right now?
Well, Australia is behind in the global race to get the vaccine rolled out quickly. As you mentioned, a small proportion of the population is fully vaccinated, less than 7%. While the rest of the developed world is marching ahead. We're seeing the coronavirus still out there in the community in many countries that have the vaccine, but the big difference, of course, is if the vaccine is rolled out fast and more quickly and a larger section of the population have it, is even if you get the virus, you're less likely to be hospitalised and far less likely to die. And as Australia grapples with how to deal with lockdowns now into the future, the reality is that we've done really well. The health restrictions, listening to the health advice, has meant we haven't had the vaccine, the COVID virus widespread in the community, and that's been great for health outcomes, great for economic outcomes, of course, as well, because if you have a healthy population, you're much more likely to have a healthy economy. But going forward, we can't escape this continual return to lockdown without a vaccinated community, and Australia is losing that global race.
So let's just talk more about that. How poorly do you think this has been rolled out, whether it's communication, promises and under-delivering? When the Australian government compares to other countries, where do you think we are at and how bad is this right now?
Well, of course, as things change, and it's a global pandemic and things change, there are new variants come on the scene, the virus gets out, governments have to change their tactics, so they do have to change, and that can change messaging. But the reality is the messaging has changed because we haven't had the supply of vaccines in Australia, in particular, alternatives to AstraZeneca. We don't have enough Pfizer in Australia. So just take today, for example, the screaming front page of the paper from doctors warns under 60-year-olds to wait for Pfizer. And this is the day after the Prime Minister told younger Australians that they should consider alternatives to Pfizer. They should go and get AstraZeneca if they have health advice from a doctor. So you're seeing two big conflicting messages because supposedly the advice has changed, but the advice has changed only because of the lack of supply. And if we had more Pfizer, we wouldn't have to be having this lack of communication. And it has been a global race to see who can get the vaccines fastest. And Australia kind of lost that race last year. And it meant it's poorly equipped to roll out the vaccine faster, particularly for younger people who all the health advice has been are better off to get Pfizer if they can. But the problem is now they can't get Pfizer.
Let's switch our attention just to finish on the Nationals and where they're at the moment. Of course, Barnaby Joyce has returned to power there, and there's reports that are suggesting he's keen, or the Nationals are keen, for coal-fired power stations. What is the latest here exactly, and what could the response or potential backlash be?
Well, this is the fallout from a big change in the power dynamic in the federal parliament, in particular in the coalition, with the elevation of Barnaby Joyce to the leader of the Nationals and now Deputy Prime Minister of Australia. That's a powerful position, obviously. He's acting Prime Minister when the PM is away, and he has enormous power and enormous authority. And now the Nationals are pushing to get a coal-fired power station built in Australia, when, of course, the rest of the world and the market knows that coal is not viable anymore for the future. There are better alternatives, cheaper alternatives. The government's already spent millions on a feasibility study. The danger here is the Nationals are now pushing the government to spend even more money on an outdated technology and really holding back Australia and Australians from the cheaper power that they can get from renewables. And while coal is often talked about as needed to back up renewables. It's increasingly unreliable. There's been a series of coal-fired power station breakdowns, even from the newer coal-fired power plants. So it can't be relied upon, and of course it's much more expensive than renewables. And the problem is, while ever there's talk of the government putting more money into coal-fired power stations, it sends a signal to the market not to invest, because you might be undercut by the government subsidising an outdated technology like coal. So there are real dangers for Australians that they'll face more expensive and unreliable power because of the power plays in Canberra that have seen the elevation of Barnaby Joyce to the Leader of the Nationals and Deputy Prime Minister.
Yeah, it's a story we'll watch. It will develop, of course, leading into the election, whenever that will take place. Ben Oquist, thank you so much. Whenever that will take place. Ben Oquist, thank you so much for your time today. We'll talk really soon.
Thanks, Adrian.
The bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.